Assalamu alaikum. In this lecture, we are going to discuss formal communication. In previous lecture, we talked about the difference between formal and informal communication. I hope by now we are clear about the definitions of formal and informal communication, and we know or we have a certain idea that a formal communication is a rule-bound communication in which we have to be careful of our norms and ethics and our relationships. Whereas informal communication is between two friends or in family, so it can be without rules, and it is less restricted. So in this lecture, we will discuss formally a little bit more about formal communication and how we can improve our formal communication, especially in writing. This lecture would help us in developing formal emails, formal texts, and formal discussions. Whenever we are writing academically, we have to use formal communication. Or so let's discuss formal communication in a little bit detail. Formal communication is a form of communication in which the flow of information is already defined. So this means that in what direction the communication will go, it is already determined and it is already known. As we discussed in the previous lecture, the medium of communication is already decided and set. Okay, so we know that what would be the topic of the discussion, only then we would begin a formal communication. Whereas in informal communication, there could be haphazard topics and we can talk about lots of other things at the same time. So the flow of communication is known in formal communication. This communication follows a hierarchical chain of command which is established by the organization itself. Now, it may be organization, it can be an institute, it can be between two individuals, but in formal communication, there is a hierarchical chain. So there is one person with more authority than the other. For example, while a student communicating with a teacher, he or she has to follow formal communication. Similarly, in any workplace context or any organization, in formal communication, we have to follow and keep in mind the hierarchical chain, that who are we talking to. In general, this type of communication is used exclusively in the workplace, and the employees are bound to follow it while performing their duties. So in workplace, in academic context, all these situations, we have to stick to formal communication. There could be various examples for formal communication, for example, making requests, making commands, orders, or writing reports, or developing certain types of minutes of meetings or emails, or certain kind of a communication has to be formal. Formal communication is considered effective as it is timely, reliable, and systematic flow of information. Formal communication is more effective than informal communication because as we discussed previously, that it can be recorded, it has proper timely, and it is reliable because it is the systematic flow of information. All right, so formal communication is more effective in these regards as compared to informal communication. Let's see. There are different types of formal communication. For example, here we have mentioned few types where we have to use a stick to formal communication. For example, while writing letters, for presentations, for speeches, for notice boards, for organizational blogs, emails, and while developing handouts and formal communication, we stick to formal communication. The following are tips to write more formally. For example, whenever we are writing, we can be informal. For example, when we are writing a text, we are used to such practice. That's why we do not follow formal communication. So there will be few tips that we will be discussing here in which we can make our writing a little bit more formal and it would sound more effective, especially in workplace context and in organizational context. Number one, do not write in the first person. In formal communication, we try to be less subjective and less opinionated, and we try to talk in third person context, and we try to generalize things as they may not be specific to us only. Okay, so for example, here is an example that I believe dogs are better than cats. So it's just better and more authentic to say that dogs are better than cats in informal communication. You do not have to use I, my, we, or us, these kind of pronouns again and again, because they would make it sound a little bit more informal. Number two, write Write out contractions in full. In formal communication, we do not use contractions like don't, won't, can't, gonna go, something like that, wanna. So all these contractions are avoided in formal communication. So rather than using these contractions in formal communication, we stick to full forms: do not, will not, have not, want to, and so on. These are very important points because these things determine instantly whether the writing form is more formal or informal. Whenever you come across any formal writing, you would see these differences at instantaneously. Okay, next is write out numbers. Okay, in informal communication, we can just write the numbers in number forms. Okay, so in formal communication, we have to write the spelling of the numbers. For example, here there are 3 children. So rather than writing 3 in number, we have written the full spelling of 3. Okay, so larger numbers, they can be used in number form as well, but smaller numbers, for smaller numbers, we write the spelling. Okay, so this sounds or this makes it more formal. Do not use slangs or idioms. In formal language, we try to avoid any idioms, phrasal verbs, or slangs or cliche words because they make it more informal. Okay, because then the meaning is might be assumed, the meaning might vary. So because in formal communication, it has to be authentic and reliable. So we just talk to the point, and we do not try to beat about the bush and decorate the words with certain phrases and certain idioms. So in formal language, it is ideally suggested that you avoid slangs as well as idioms. Okay, so for example, wicked, awesome, these are a little bit more informal words and slang words. Okay, so rather you can use incredible and impressive. These words can make a huge difference in making your writing more formal. Okay, if you practice it a little bit, you can compare few formal writings with few informal writings. Then you'll have such an idea that what words are more used in informal communication and which words are used more in formal communication. Moving on, we have do not use cliches. In formal communication, we do not use cliche words, cliche structures, or phrases. Okay, at the end of the day, scientists are unsure of the causes of global warming. Okay, so this is little bit unoriginal or redundant type of a structure. Rather than using this type of structure, cliche structure, you have to think of your own structure and review it a little bit. Review it a little bit and then develop a different structure, and then you can come up with more formal language. Overused words, idioms and phrases are also cliche and they are avoided in formal communication. Do not use excessive punctuation, especially exclamation marks. You might have noticed that whenever we are texting, we use so many exclamation marks, so many punctuation. Like at the time, we would use 2 question marks, two like 4 5 commas, just to emphasize a point. Because that is a short form of writing and that is more informal. So whenever using formal language, we have to avoid excessive punctuation. We have to avoid excessive exclamation marks and other punctuation marks, so and so. Okay, so to make your writing more formal, just stick to the punctuation wherever it is needed. Okay, for example, at the end of a sentence, you have to give a full stop. Okay, or for example, if you have to exclaim something, you can use 1 exclamation mark, but not too many. Okay, so try to make your writing more academic and more formal. Do not abbreviate. Okay, again, abbreviation is not reliable and it is not a good idea to use abbreviated forms in formal communication. In informal communication, you can use abbreviations, but in formal communication, you have to be authentic and you have to give only one idea what does it mean. So you do not have to use any abbreviation in formal language. You also, as we discussed earlier, you also have to avoid phrasal verbs. Okay, rather than using deal with, you can use handle. Okay, rather than using make up something, you can say invent, because these words are more formal than using these phrasal verbs. Okay, so these were few tips that you have to stick to whenever you're talking about formal communication. These things would help us make, these are very small few tips that would instantly make your communication, your writing a little bit more formal and a little bit academic. Thank you so much. I hope you practice writing and you try to improve on these tips, and then you can see the difference in your writing. Thank you.